We're playing with having proper lighting. I haven't mastered it yet, so if I'm really washed out, I've not worked out my colour correction right. Hey ballerinos, welcome back to Reformation Rambles, a series where I tell you all about the history of the European Reformation. Today we're going to be talking about a Castilian Dominican friar who would become the first Inquisitor General of the Spanish Inquisition. Born in either Valladolid or Torquemada, we're not sure, in 1420, let's talk about Tomas De Torquemada. Part 1. Devout Converso. Thomas's uncle Juan de Torquemada was a devout Catholic and a cardinal. He was also a theologian, and his grandma was a Conversa. Now what this meant was she had been Jewish and had become Christian. A lot of the times this wasn't through choice. There were a lot of pogroms in like the 1300s where Jews were forcibly converted to Christianity. And they weren't really taught what Christianity was, they were just kind of told it was their religion now. Thomas entered the San Pablo Dominican monastery when he was very young. We don't have an exact age, but he was a child, essentially. He was a huge advocate of church orthodoxy, and he established a reputation for piety and austerity. Around the time he was promoted to the prior at Santa Cruz Monastery, he met the Princess Isabella, who I made a video about here. She was a cool lady, you should go watch that one. They very quickly developed a pretty solid rapport. This was based on similar religious beliefs as well as similar political ideology. He served as Isabella's confessor and personal advisor throughout his entire life. He was present at her coronation in 1474, and he supported her through the civil war that followed. He was also one of the people who suggested originally that she should marry Ferdinand of Aragon. This effectively united Spain. He'd also become Ferdinand's confessor as well, really climbing that greasy pole. Just from the off, this guy did some awful shit. He thought the Moors, who were like Muslim people in Spain, were a menace. He thought they had too much economic dominance and religious influence in Spain. Some like full-on Tommy Robinson shit. Eventually, based on his advice, Ferdinand and Isabella sent a request to Rome to request permission to have an Inquisition in Spain. Pope Sixtus IV would grant this request and permit the Holy Office for the propagation of the faith in 1478, which takes us to Part 2, Inquisitor General. Now there had been inquisitors dating back to the 1300s, especially in Aragon. They weren't like this full-on institution that they would become. The papal bull they received gave the monarchs full power to name inquisitors, but only Rome could formally appoint them. Tomas De Torquemada was appointed the first Inquisitor General in Spain, although he would not be the only one. He was Grand Inquisitor of Spain from 1478 until his death. He'd eventually pass on his position as royal confessor to a guy called Diego Casa, and this guy would eventually become the second Grand Inquisitor. The route on this career path is pretty evident. In 1485, Thomas would promote his 28 Articles of Faith, and these would guide his Inquisition investigations for the rest of his life. To summarise it classed the following as criminal offences: heresy, apostasy, witchcraft, bigamy, usury, and blasphemy. He established tribunals really quickly. It grew from one in Seville to ones in Jaén, Cordoba, Real, and Saragossa. There were almost 24 of these courts opened under his leadership. I think most people don't entirely know what the Inquisition was. We all think of that Monty Python sketch.
Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition!
Very little else, so let me explain what coming under investigation from the Inquisition actually meant. People were summoned, or rather taken from their homes to a secret location to be questioned. This was often based on an anonymous tip to the Inquisition. which, by the way, could be from anyone. People were reported due to family feuds and personal vendettas, things they literally just didn't do. Testimony that would normally be discarded in criminal trials was permitted by the Inquisition, so this would be testimony from thieves, excommunicated individuals, just general criminals. The accused person was kept in a dark room so they could not see the person accusing them, or the judges. They weren't allowed a lawyer because under the Inquisition's own rules, if the person was guilty, then the lawyer was then an accomplice to heresy. Therefore was also guilty, so no one's going to take that case on. Accused had to take an oath of faith. A refusal made them automatically guilty. At minimum, they would get life imprisonment if they refused to take this oath. This gave Thomas strong control over all priests and bishops, because they were all one slip away from being dobbed in. They're terrified of this guy. The perfect Catholic doesn't exist. But not being a perfect Catholic can get you killed. The prosecutor and the judge were usually the same person, so why would they find you innocent, really? And everyone was presumed guilty until proven innocent. And then even if, after all that, you're found innocent and freed, you still had to wear a San Benito. This was like an overgarment, and it would have an image to show the penance that they had to do. So if you were to be set on fire, it would show like flames. If you weren't given penance, it wouldn't show very much at all, but you still have this thing labelling you as a person who has been under suspicion of the Inquisition, which makes you a much easier target, doesn't it? People would pay bribes to be released, and even if you appealed to Rome, Thomas oversaw all appeals before they were submitted, so probably wasn't getting to Rome. If they were found guilty, thousands of people were burned in mass bonfires, essentially called auto de fe. And Thomas was proud of this. He was proud that he was killing sinners. The Inquisition primarily targeted Jewish families that had been forcibly converted to Christianity, still took part in Jewish traditions. Like, it's quite common now for people to be culturally Jewish but not religiously so. It's widely believed most people who came under the suspicion of the Inquisition were essentially that. They were trying to be Christian, but they'd inherited family traditions that they didn't realise were associated with Judaism. The Inquisition would also go after anyone who opposed the Inquisition. Torture was frequently used to extract confessions from people. Some information from the time implies over 8,000 people died by fire, and over 9,000 were punished in other ways. This is almost definitely not true. Some sources say 2,000 were killed. We don't know. There is so much propaganda from this time, it's almost impossible to find an actual reliable number. But at absolute minimum, we're talking hundreds of lives here. Thomas really advocated for burning guilty people. Now, Rome knew how cruel the Inquisition was and still let it happen. So many petitions for clemency or forgiveness were sent to Rome that the Pope actually called Inquisition representatives to discuss the issues 3 separate times whilst Thomas was Inquisitor General. They knew Thomas was cruel and severe, and all they did was appoint 4 assistant inquisitors, 1494, and a lot of that was to reduce the expansion of this growing Inquisition that was actually kind of taking a bit of power from Rome. I don't think it was because they cared. I don't think they gave a shit. Thomas also pushed for the expulsion of the Jews in 1494. In fact, when Jewish families offered 30,000 ducats, monies to rescind the expulsion, and Ferdinand was going to accept this, Thomas talked him out of it. The story goes that he walked into Ferdinand's office with a crucifix in hand and said, "Judas Iscariot sold for 30 pieces of silver. Your Highness is about to sell him for 30,000 ducats. Here he is. Take him and sell him." And then he put the crucifix on the table and stormed out. This may not be how it went down. It's become a bit of a legend, I think. But he definitely did talk Ferdinand out of accepting the money. Now, from here, everything seems awful, right? How did this happen? Wasn't everyone appalled? Well, No. Thomas's activities were largely supported by public opinion. Quote, "The hammer of heretics, the light of Spain, the senior of his country, the honour of his orders." This was written by Almeida, who was a royal chronicler at the time. Part 3. Retirement. As the assistant inquisitors were hired, Thomas kind of retired at the monastery of St. Thomas Aquinas in Avila. He only left for duties assisting the king and queen. In 1498 he held his last general assembly, and he would die and be entombed in this monastery. His tomb was robbed and his corpse was allegedly incinerated sort of hors de face style in 1832, just 2 years before the Inquisition was formally discontinued. And that's the story of Tomas De Torquemada. I really hope you enjoyed this. If you did, give me a cheeky like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments if I touched on anything you'd like to hear more about. And I'll see you next week.